So, Stefan, thanks for taking the time to talk
Course.
with me today. It's always a pleasure to interview other people from the CDTM. For everyone who doesn't know the CDTM, it's one of the best entrepreneurship programs that that you can do in Germany, if not in Europe. I did it myself many years ago, and Stefan also completed it, I think, more or less recently. And
Absolutely.
with that, I would already like to let you start. So, Stefan, tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm Stefan. I'm originally from Innsbruck, Austria. I studied at the CDTM, did my master's in the United States, moved to Switzerland to do work. I worked as an APM at Google on Calendar, and now I moved back very recently back to Munich, where I did my undergrad to start a company here. Yeah.
Very nice. For those who don't know these acronyms, what is an APM at Google?
Oh yeah. An APM is an associate product manager. That means basically you're a product manager, but you're still like learning how to do the job. So it's on the job training, as we like to say.
Mhm. Very nice. And so basically, you moved to Zurich for Google, right?
Absolutely, yeah. The Google APM program actually is structured in a way there are like around 50 APMs starting every year worldwide. Most of them start in the United States, around 40, I would say, and a few start in Europe, split between London and Zurich. And since I did my internship in Zurich, in the Zurich-based office, and I really loved the city, I decided to come back, start my APM rotation in Zurich.
Hmm. Very nice. And how does this work? Is this something where you get to say, I want to do this rotation in Zurich, or do they basically send you to Zurich? How's the mechanic behind choosing this?
Yeah, so what happens is usually you apply to a role, like you can either apply to the Zurich role or the London role or the United States roles, and then you get assigned to that office if you get the job, and then the APM program takes your preferences and assigns you to a team that fits your preferences.
So in the end, you picked Zurich over London, for example, in particular, or was it more random?
Yes, I did pick Zurich over London. Yeah.
Very interesting. So what made you pick Zurich?
What made me pick Zurich? So for me, it was like being closer to nature, right? If you compare it, I mean, it's a completely different environment. London is this huge European city with millions of people. Zurich has like not even a million people living there. It's much closer to the mountains. It's much closer to nature. And that was really a big priority for me at the time. Also, quality of life in Zurich is just amazing. Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, I personally I can definitely confirm that as somebody who moved to Zurich and has been here for a couple of years or in the wider area around Zurich. The quality of living is definitely amazing. Did you also look into completely other countries, like in the US, for example, or other continents? Was that ever an option for this role?
So going to the US would have probably been an option. I actively decided against it. Because so mostly for me it was personal reasons, right? I lived in the Bay Area, like San Francisco Bay Area for about a year. And then I felt like I wanted to come back to Europe, be closer to my family, be closer to my partner, and just experience good public transport. Once again, because that really is a very different lifestyle, right? If you live in the Bay Area, if you live in the suburbs, it's very car reliant. And there's a lot of single family homes, and I wanted to have a bit more city life. I didn't want to be reliant on a car. So that was these factors. But I mean, in terms of nature, the San Francisco Bay Area definitely can compete with Zurich, especially in the summer, especially when it comes to hiking. You might have to drive a bit further. You might have to go by car, not by train. But I would say it's definitely comparable.
Hmm. Yeah, as somebody who's also coincidentally lived in the Bay Area for a while, many years ago, I can confirm it's very car related, and either you're in a suburban area like Berkeley, San Francisco, or you absolutely need a car. And even in these more city like areas, you yeah tend to need a car. So
Absolutely.
that's definitely one of the big differences.
Yeah.
So, what's your impression of Zurich? How did you find it?
Yeah, so I lived there for like 14 months, right? And I did visit my girlfriend in Munich a bunch of times. I did visit my parents in Austria a bunch of times. So I had a bit of this commuter lifestyle. Um, Although of course most of my time was still spent in Zurich. So I really, really enjoyed the city. Again, quality of life, closeness to nature. That was all things that I knew beforehand, and that definitely proved true. What I underestimated is how great everything is that is like public services, and that includes public transport, everything that you have to do with the city authority, tax authority, everything that has to do with that. It really just works flawlessly, and it's built in a way that feels very yeah, high quality. So it's always a pleasure dealing with these institutions, which I can't say about any other country really that I've lived in.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, how do you compare that actually to Germany? I mean, Germany and especially the south of Germany is often also praised for having a very high quality of living. If you compare Munich and Zurich directly, both cities where you've lived for a while and that you now kind of know well, how would you compare the infrastructure and also dealing with authorities in Munich versus Zurich?
Yeah. So I would say the difference isn't as stark, right? It feels bigger if you've lived in two cities, but if you compare it to like even other cities in the German speaking regions, or if you compare it to even other speaking like other countries, um there isn't that much of a difference, I would say. That's the first thing. That's why it's always getting compared, because it's not that different. Generally speaking, Munich is much bigger. We have like 1.6 million people here at this point, I think. And Munich really grew a lot in recent years. Zurich did as well. In Munich, it sort of feels a bit like the growing pains are there a bit more, right? Housing is very hard to get. Public infrastructure is just overwhelmed with the number of people. Sometimes it feels like even like getting like registering in the city, right? You have to update the site multiple times to get an appointment, hope you get an appointment, then like basically take a day off to get there and do the appointment. Whereas in Zurich, you can basically just walk in and be like, hey, I'm here now. Wait 5 to 10 minutes and be done with it. And yeah, I've talked about public transport before, which is just insanely good in Zurich. Even when it comes to connecting to like mountains, right? There's trains going up mountains, which I've never seen before. Particularly not in Germany. That's just very different. Yeah, and of course Zurich is a bit closer to the mountains. So outdoor outdoor stuff is definitely greater in Zurich. Although in Munich, you're not too far away from Austria and the Austrian Alps, which can definitely compete with the Swiss Alps and the likes of
Mhm.
Grindelwald and all the other stuff. I may be biased because I'm Austrian, but um, uh,
Right, yeah.
take it with a grain of salt. But take it from me, the Austrian Alps are amazing. Um, and yeah, what else? Let me think. So one thing I want to highlight is the food. Like Munich is just a bigger city. There's more diversity in food. Like if you're into Asian food, you're gonna have a better selection here. It's definitely much more affordable when it comes to eating in a restaurant, going out, partying, everything like that. you still see there is like a Swiss premium to these things. So this is something I would highlight if you're into that, if you want to experience these different cultures, then Munich is still, I would say, the better place to be. Although Zurich also feels very international.
Hmm. Out of those two, which would you say is more international, Munich or Zurich?
That's a hard call to make because Zurich feels smaller, and just due to being smaller, the absolute number of like internationals in Zurich is much lower than in Munich. Percentage wise, I would say it doesn't, like, there's not too much of a difference. People have told me that like Zurich feels more international. Um, there is definitely a lot of people from the US, generally like all kinds of places in the world that you don't see as much in Munich. So I've definitely I feel like there's a big American population in Zurich, which skews the picture. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting that you're saying this because actually I had a similar impression of the whole area in Zurich and also in Zug, where I live now, that there's a surprising number of Americans, and to me it always feels like subjectively, and that's not based on any hard evidence, but I would actually say it's maybe slightly more international compared to when I was living in Munich. But maybe it's changed now. I've not seen Munich the last couple of years too much. So,
Yeah, it's always hard to say, right? When you're living in such a big city, you are choosing a certain place to live. You're in your bubble. We've talked about the CDTM before, which is such an international place too. So yeah, take that with a grain of salt as well. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I think this is always important to keep in mind. People like us, we sort of do live in a bubble, which is in some senses maybe good, and in other senses not so good. So we have a certain view on cities like Zurich and Munich that maybe not everyone shares in every dimension.
Yeah.
So you talked a lot about infrastructure and sort of reliability of the city. What else would you say were sort of the highlights of living in Zurich for a little over a year?
So I really connected well with the Swiss lifestyle, right? Taking the bike basically everywhere you go, like in every weekend, being on a mountain, going into the lake, going swimming. That is something I thoroughly enjoyed, and that I really, really appreciate about the place. Switzerland is also located pretty nicely, right? It's not too far away from Paris. I think you can get there in a few hours by train. You can get to Munich in 3.5 hours. You can get to Innsbruck in 3.5 hours. So there's a lot of places you can visit. Not to mention Italy, of course, right? It's like and also even the Italian speaking part of Switzerland. So basically, if you're not from Europe, that might feel very different. Because you're just in train, like you hop in a train and you can visit 5 countries within a few hours, which is really awesome. And even within Switzerland, right? You go to the French speaking part, it's a different culture, it's a different language. You go to the Italian speaking part, it's like also different language, also different culture. So if you enjoy that kind of thing, then Switzerland is definitely an awesome place to be. Particularly Zurich, which is just well connected by train. Yeah, I didn't even have a car or ever felt like I needed a car in Zurich.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really worth mentioning. That's kind of the cool thing. Even though a lot of the Swiss do have cars and probably some of the most expensive cars in Europe, it is in especially in the urban areas of Switzerland, you don't really need a car necessarily. I think that's a big a feature that you have in Zurich and its surroundings, as well as a few others, of course, in Switzerland, and to a certain degree also, I think, in Germany, although How would you compare that actually, the reliability of public transportation in and around Munich versus in and around Zurich now in like 2023, 2022 maybe?
Yeah, that's a touchy subject, particularly in Germany. So I mean, the common knowledge is right that the Swiss train connection is just more reliable than the German one, which I would say is absolutely true. Like the German rail network just feels completely overwhelmed and just at capacity, whereas the Swiss rail network just feels like it's still working reliably, which makes a huge difference when you're planning stuff, and when you want to connect trains or like when you want to take longer routes. So that definitely is a big difference, and that even stretches into Zurich, like the city connections within Zurich. So Swiss trains still are very much on time. And I mentioned this before. The Zurich train, or like the Swiss train network from Zurich, it really stretches even to like touristy places or like places you would visit on the weekend, which is not necessarily the case in Germany or like southern Germany so much, right? So if you want to visit the mountains on the weekend in Germany, you are better off renting a car. You're better off just hopping into a car and going up a mountain or going into a small village and doing a hike there. In Switzerland, it's definitely doable and even recommended sometimes to just take a train up a mountain, and then do a hike from there, which I found very surprising, but also a huge boost in quality of life. So yeah, that's one thing. Also, there's the Swiss Halbtax, which is this thing that you can buy. I think it costs 180 francs right now. And it basically allows you to take all the trains at half price, which makes them reasonably affordable. They're definitely not cheap. They're still more expensive than the German trains, but it's a good investment to make if you want to use the train extensively. And you can even use it for like city transport, and some gondolas and light rail. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely confirm that the Hyperplex is something that probably everyone should get, and I think it pays off after using it for 2 or 3 weeks already. Usually, I always feel like the prices in Switzerland, they're calculated as if everybody had this Hyperplex already, and because otherwise it's sort of like you pay twice for the trains, which are, as you said, they're kind of expensive, especially for somebody who doesn't earn a Swiss salary. I can definitely confirm that.
Absolutely.
So we talked a lot about the kind of the fun sides of Switzerland and Zurich in particular. Was there anything on the more negative side that surprised you, that maybe disappointed you when living in Zurich?
So let me think about that. Yeah. So one thing I would say, it didn't really surprise me. I was aware of it when I moved there, as are probably most people. When you move to a German-speaking country and you've never been there before, and particularly if you move there for work, it's quite a challenge to build a social circle. And usually what is recommended is like join a Verein, join an organization, some kind of hobby project, which I didn't do because I commuted so much. Like went into Austria, went traveling for work, went traveling privately. So it was really hard to establish that for me personally. And it took me then a while to actually build a social circle. Again, I would attribute that partly to just working versus studying when you naturally meet more people. But I also would attribute it to like just the culture of German-speaking countries and Switzerland in particular, that is just more time intensive to form friendships. I do have a few Swiss friends now, which I am I'm a bit proud of that. But yeah, it definitely takes a while, and it's definitely something that you should invest in, if you wanna stay there.
It's interesting that you say that, because I hear that so often, that making friends, and especially not just superficial friendships in Switzerland, is more on the difficult side compared to the neighboring countries and the rest of Europe. Do you have any recommendations for somebody who's just moving to Switzerland, or who maybe already has moved to Switzerland and has been living here for about a year and still doesn't really have friends? How do you, as an expat, how do you become friends with the Swiss, or with maybe even local people who've been here for a longer period?
Yeah, so I mean the obvious thing is just join like some kind of organization, like can be a sports group, can be a theater. I've seen a lot of people do that. Like engage in something that you care about. Because you're gonna find people along the way that care about the same thing, which just gives you opportunities to connect to them. Which of course is like the first step in forming friendships. Yeah, don't be disappointed, particularly if you come from the US or like any country that is where it's easier to form friendships, if it just takes time, right? That's what I said. It might feel harder. I feel it's not necessarily much harder. It just takes more time. It just takes more energy. And it's something that doesn't come as easy or naturally. So don't be disappointed if it doesn't like snap within 2 days or even 2 weeks. Maybe it does after 2 months, or maybe it does after 6 months. And at some point it will like people will open up and it's easier. I think this advice is true for all German speaking countries. And it's not unique to Switzerland. And I think it's just important not to lose hope too quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely support that. And it's interesting that you're saying it sort of generalizes to German speaking countries. I think that's also true. Having grown up in Germany, a German speaking country, obviously, and seeing various parts of it, that's definitely true. Although I feel like Switzerland is sort of a bit more difficult, even. At least it was for me. You can easily be sidetracked, so to say, by work, right? You come to Switzerland, you have to work hard and everything. You have to adapt, and then sometimes you lose this building and also investing in friendships out of sight of it, which is not just only going for a hike, because it's so easy, to find people on Facebook to hike to Jungfraujoch together or something. But then you have to follow up. You have to do it again and so on, to turn it into from acquaintance to something like a friendship.
Absolutely, right. And it's yeah. I mean, I grew up in Innsbruck, Austria, but people tell me the same thing about Innsbruck, and it's like maybe it's all these alpine regions where people are just less open in initially to new people. But yeah, that's definitely a thing. And like what you said about work really resonated as well, right? You come to a new country, you work there, you work hard. Switzerland is known for like people working hard. People want to make it there. People don't necessarily move to Switzerland to only like enjoy their free time. So if you work a lot of hours and if you come home like I don't know, at 6, 7 p.m. every day and just feeling very tired, it's hard to invest that time, and it's hard to actually just commit to these more like deeper friendships.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's also something that people sometimes underestimate a bit. And again, here the difference, at least on paper, it's not that big. But in Switzerland, probably has some of the highest average working hours in Europe, where in France and Germany you sometimes work more like 35, 38 hours per week. In Switzerland it's more like 42.5, and that's sort of the regular working hours. I wouldn't go as far as saying that in every job, especially in IT, extra hours are the norm. I think that's not, or at least it's not my experience, unless maybe you're like a manager or entrepreneur, then of course. But even though it's 42.5 compared with 38, in the end, it comes out as like an additional hour per day, more or less, which can absolutely make a difference, right? Because you're like 1 hour more tired. And you
Exactly.
might say, well, today I'm just going to sleep. I'm not going to, I don't know, go out for a beer or something. That's something I think you can deal with it, or at least I managed to deal with it. But I noticed that for many expats in the first year or so, it's a bit of a challenge for them to get into this and to adapt.
Absolutely.
So one thing that I always find interesting is how was it? I take it you had a girlfriend already before you moved to Switzerland. How was that? Did you bring her along, or how did everything work out for you guys?
Yeah, so we were in a long distance relationship before that when I was in California, and then when I moved back to Switzerland, we had the discussion whether she would like she was in Munich at the time. We had the discussion whether she would move to Switzerland as well. We ultimately decided against it because it was actually harder for her to find a job there than it was in Munich. Uh, I don't really know why. It was just maybe at the time the market was easier in Munich. So we decided to basically stay to stay like split up between Zurich and Munich. Um, yeah, so I mean, for me, it was definitely easier than like being in the United States, right? It's closer, and you can look, you can just hop in a train and be in Munich in 3.5 hours. And the awesome thing is, if you're dependent on a train prices don't tend to fluctuate too much at some point, so you can basically spontaneously decide when and like how to come to Munich, which is a big difference from, say, London, which was also a factor for us, because of course you can fly to London, but if you fly and if you have to book a plane, you have to book that in advance. You have to go to the airport. It's a whole big ordeal. And I worked in like very close to the main station, so I could literally after work on Friday or something, just hop into the next train that was there, book a ticket while I was walking to the train station, hop into the train, and be in Munich in like 3.5 hours. It's still 3.5 hours though, so it's not easy. It's not nothing. And it definitely was still felt like a long distance relationship. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you're saying this. Once again, this resonates very much with myself because I had a similar setup in the very beginning. And a couple of years back, when I came in 2019 to Switzerland, it was even longer. Like the train, sort of the same train, would take 5 hours, and I think the bus took around 4 hours, which was faster, but it was much less comfortable. So sometimes I would actually opt for the slower but more comfortable train.
Yeah.
And that was really improved very much, I think, 1 or 2 years ago when they dramatically speeded up the trains, and I think that's a very big advantage now, especially in this combination of Munich and Zurich. Can definitely confirm that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there is the bus, like it's called Flixbus, and you can also take it. I think it doesn't take much longer. I think it's almost the same time. But taking the bus always felt a bit less convenient, a bit more like cramped. And the buses are also in questionable condition sometimes. So it definitely always felt like a bit of a gamble when you took a bus. Sometimes everything worked out and everything was awesome. Sometimes it was not the best experience.
Yeah, definitely. I can confirm that, which is why I'm happy that the trains are much better now. And nowadays they even have Wi-Fi, because for a long time SBB didn't have Wi-Fi, probably because the mobile phone signal in Switzerland is the normal mobile phone signal is so good. So they might have said, well, you don't really need Wi-Fi anyways, right? And also the plans are very generous. You get unlimited mobile data with 5G in Switzerland for, I think, around 30 Swiss francs per month if you go with the discount brands. But nowadays you even have Wi-Fi in the train. So if you don't live in Switzerland, or if you don't have one of these plans, then you can get that even on the train. Just be aware that the signal might not be so good on the German part of the route. At least that was
Yeah,
my experience.
it's basically non-existent. Which is also something like talking about mobile like contracts and mobile connections. I mean, it was a meme in Germany like a few years ago that like the mobile connections were so expensive and so bad. They have improved a lot, but Switzerland is still, I would say, 5 years ahead of Germany when it comes to coverage, when it comes to speed, when it comes to contracts. So that is something that I definitely like enjoyed a lot in Switzerland. Is just you have this connection, you have it even on the mountains, in the trains. There is no reason to worry about that.
Yeah, I can definitely confirm that. I'm curious a bit though. So you mentioned it was the sort of the job market was harder for your girlfriend. Do you know why she found it harder to find a job in Switzerland or in Zurich in particular compared to Munich?
Mm-hmm. So she like her background is biology, so she looked into jobs there, and I think she applied to some roles. Eventually, though, she ended up at a place where she had done an internship in Munich before. So I think partly it was just that like having that personal connection to that company that she worked prior that made it easier for her. Partly though, it was also because the job market is just a bit smaller. Again, it's a smaller country. There are not too many big companies out there employing in every single role. You see that even in my field in IT, versus say Munich, where there's just a lot more going on, right? If I take like IT or computer science as an example, I think Google is still one of the biggest employers in Zurich or even in all of Switzerland. Like there are thousands of people, and there are not too many other companies that you can go to, that you can apply to. There are the big banks where you can do IT, but it's like always a bit of a side thing, right, for them. So it's never at the center of their value prop. And then there are of course smaller companies. There are a few startups, but it definitely doesn't feel as huge, as sprawling as like other places, say Munich, say Berlin, say London. I always felt there was more choice. There was a bigger ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. So basically, it's you would say, at least in your perspective and probably your girlfriend's, it's kind of the size of the ecosystem. It's just if you're specialized in something, maybe then it might be harder to find something that is in that area, unless you're lucky and it also coincidentally is something that Swiss companies tend to be specialized in, like as you mentioned. If it's something that the banks need or you're in banking, then yeah, maybe it's actually going to be much easier for you depending on where you're coming from. But if you're doing something where the Swiss economy isn't really that focused on, then it might also be much harder, and there's less options to kind of move somewhere else without already being in a different country.
Absolutely. And I think one thing to keep in mind is Switzerland has one of the highest wages in the European Union. Or I mean, it's not in the European Union, but like in the European like economic area. And a lot, and at the same time, it has a high quality of life. So a lot of people want to move to Switzerland. A lot of people want to take jobs here, particularly when they're young, when they're mobile, and when they don't have that much work experience. So these jobs usually are pretty high in demand. Like you face a lot more competition than in your average country in Europe, just because there's so many more people that want to move to Switzerland to do the job and to live here, which I think is something to be aware of. And if you don't have any connection to the country, then people like when you apply there, people might ask, well, why do you want to move to Switzerland, right? It's like there's this other person who maybe studied here or maybe did something. And this is particularly for smaller companies, this might be relevant. For Google or the likes of it, probably not so much. Yeah, just something to be aware of. It's always easier to apply when you're local to the area, because you just know maybe people there, maybe something about the company. You can show or highlight a bit of a connection to that specific place. Yeah.
So basically, what you're saying is it's much harder to find more junior roles, more entry level roles, versus more senior roles in Switzerland. Is that correct?
So I can't say too much about the senior roles. I've experienced from like friends and other people I met that like finding junior roles in Switzerland, as say compared to Germany, it feels harder, or like it seems harder. I can't judge senior roles. I don't have any data points there. I can just imagine that like in senior roles, people like might apply where they are living. They might not be willing to move that much, so the effect might be less strong. But this is mostly speculation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's interesting that you're mentioning this. I never thought of this too much myself because I was already more or less senior when I moved to Switzerland. But I think I heard this from quite some people that it is a bit harder to find the junior roles, culturally, because the Swiss often they like to kind of hire experts who can already, be productive on day one or two, something which of course never happens, and I'm exaggerating a bit, of course, but I often have the feeling that that's sort of the attitude, especially in the authentically Swiss companies, not in the international companies that have an office in Switzerland, but the original Swiss companies. And yeah, I think there might be. It probably depends a bit on the year, but in some years there might be more competition for the less experienced roles, and generally the less experienced jobs for people who want to move to Switzerland. Whereas I often feel like in the highly specialized roles, be it because they're more senior or be it because they're just a more rare talent in general, it's still remarkable to see that companies can't fill these roles.
Yeah, and you see that definitely, that like for senior roles, people are like hiring and trying to hire like crazy, and like paying people to relocate to Switzerland, right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Like I can definitely confirm that anything that's senior or to management, things like these, companies are trying to make it as easy as possible to relocate to Switzerland. Whereas for junior roles, if you're lucky, the same can happen. I think you have an easier time there with more international and bigger companies versus smaller companies. But there again, I think it highly depends on kind of how rare you are, how much they want you, and in the end, how many people are coming into Switzerland or considering to come to Switzerland around that same time, which I think fluctuates a lot. There's always this perception of there's this steady influx of people into Switzerland. And in the past, if you look at the last 10 years or so, that was definitely true in some years, but not in all years. Sometimes it was more like the reverse. And it's not even always clear why. And then, of course, there was the Corona time when generally less people moved to Switzerland, which also changed these mechanics a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm also curious, Switzerland has its own, or at least the German-speaking part of Switzerland pretty much has its own language, Swiss German, which is drastically different from standard German, even the one that you speak in southern Germany, in cities like Munich. Do you have to learn Swiss German to get along?
Hmm. So in my perception, at least understanding Swiss German is definitely a big plus. It was funny because I'm a German native speaker, and when I moved to the United States, I still felt like I could understand everything and like have a conversation with everyone. And then I moved to Switzerland, like a German speaking country, and suddenly at the post office, I was like, "Can you please repeat that? I didn't get a single word." So that was something that was yeah, remarkable, really. And I feel like most people that move to Switzerland struggle with the Swiss dialect initially. and at least to understand it. In my perception, is not necessary to learn to speak it. I always felt like just basically when you have a conversation with a Swiss German person, just speaking in your normal dialect, in your normal language that you speak, and then like they respond maybe in Swiss German, or like maybe a more high German version of that Swiss German. It works pretty well, and it's generally not looked down upon. Yeah, I think that it's different when you say you're in a relationship with someone who's Swiss and you want to stay there long term. Then it might really make sense to just try to learn it with them, and try to really start speaking a Swiss dialect as well. That being said, it can be hard, and like at the beginning, even if you know like, and if you speak perfect German, learning Swiss German is not easy. It will sound a bit funny. And I always had this fear. Maybe it's irrational. Maybe it's like a thing that I'm like mocking people or something. It's like so it's like I don't want to feel like, I don't want to imitate your dialect in a bad way, right? It just feels a bit disrespectful if you don't know the other person.
How long did it take you until you could roughly understand the Swiss German replies of people, or generally when the Swiss spoke Swiss German to you?
I would say a few months. It was a process though. At some point it just felt a bit more natural to listen to, and like I could get what they were saying. Even like the if they used like different vocabulary and stuff, you pick it up, right? As you have conversations. I had this one moment when my girlfriend was visiting me, and like we had a conversation with this German person, and I just could have the conversation easily. And afterwards, she told me, it's like I didn't get a single word. I was like, wow, I figured it out, right? It's like now I got it. So it's a process, and it doesn't happen like a switch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I've heard that before.
Yeah.
So in the end, after about 14 months, you decided to leave Zurich and Switzerland again. What was the motivation to basically go back to Munich?
So I really wanted to start a company. And starting a company is always, particularly when you're doing a startup, right? It's always very much dependent on the network you have, like people you know. It's just where you feel the most comfortable. I spent almost 5 years in Munich. I know so many people here, so it just felt very natural to come here. My co-founder is also originally from Munich. So it just felt like the natural thing to do. There weren't any considerations like taxes or like environment, etc. That were like the primary focus. I will say that the startup ecosystem in Munich and like particularly Berlin, but even in Munich, is bigger than in Switzerland and in Zurich. So that was definitely a benefit. On the flip side, of course, Germany does have higher taxes, and does so you pay your fair share here. And Switzerland definitely feels like you can yeah, just save on taxes if you live there. So I definitely took a cut there. But that was a price I paid to be closer to the people I know, closer to the innovation ecosystem, closer to my girlfriend. And I'm happy that I now am. And I don't have to come to Germany every 3 weeks by train, and spending hours in the train.
Mm-hmm. So in the end, basically, the good old family friends network, that's kind of what you brought you back to Munich, even though at least on a certain viewpoint from taxes, it would have been beneficial to stay in Switzerland.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other thing is, right, if my girlfriend had moved to Switzerland at a time, maybe the discussion would have been different. And maybe then like the consideration would have been a different one. I think it's definitely possible to start a company in Switzerland. You might need to pay people a bit better, but usually when you're funded by investors, that's not That's not the primary hurdle. Um, but it's a great place to like hire people to do innovation, as well as Munich. So I don't think there's a huge difference here.
Hmm. So basically, you would say, sort of with equal factors for somebody who knows Munich very well, has a lot of friends there, compared to somebody who knows Zurich very well, has a lot of friends there, and so on. It's roughly equally easy to start a business in technology in these two cities, right?
Absolutely. So I mean, starting a technology business is always like very dependent on what exactly you do, right? If you have customer, like I would say always be close to your customers. If you have Swiss customers, if you target the Swiss market, then obviously be in Switzerland. Be aware that the Swiss market is smaller than say the German market, or some other markets. So that definitely is a bit of a different environment, right? But on the other hand, if you're a technology business, it's always relatively easy to expand to other markets as well.
Hmm. Yeah, very interesting. To hear that. I kind of agree that it's always good to be close to your customers. What I see very often nowadays in both Germany and Switzerland is actually that many companies still try to target the US market, for example, or some other market that's surprisingly far away, which can often be really challenging. But then again, sometimes it's hard to get around this because in Europe, wherever you are, we just don't have such big markets. So it's always interesting to have this discussion, like how close should you or can you even be to your customers, or should your customers kind of be those who are around you if you can't or don't want to move?
Yeah. No, exactly, right. And Swiss customers, they are like they do have a high income, they do have a high disposable income. So it's an interesting market to think about as well, when it comes to starting a business there. And it's relatively shielded, I would say, because it's not part of the EU, and it just feels a bit separated. So that can also be an advantage. There are a lot of great startups coming out of Zurich, particularly in deep tech and some other fields.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. But of course, also in Munich, I'm constantly surprised and amazed what keeps coming out of Munich. And also, of course, out of the our CDTM.
It's incredible, really, right? It's so many companies. I had a bike ride today through Munich, and I just saw it's like, oh, there's a startup office. I was like, oh, I know this company. They're a CDTM company. It's like, oh, I know this other company. It's incredible how much they shape the city at this point.
Definitely. So, what's the next step for you? What are you doing now in Munich?
Yeah, so we're just starting a company, working in the social commerce space, working closely with creators, working closely with brands. Um, really excited to see that happening right now. And working with a really good friend from the CDTM as well, to build that. And it's just exciting, to build a technology company, and to build a community around that. So I thoroughly enjoy that.
Are you still in stealth mode with your business, or do you want to pitch it a bit more?
Yeah, we still are in stealth mode. We're still are validating some hypotheses. So maybe at a later point we can talk more. But for now, I think this is as concrete as I want to get at this point.
Yeah, sure. That's perfect. So, anything else that you feel is interesting to share about your time in Zurich or in Switzerland in general?
Um, yeah, so I would say like if you happen to get a good job in Zurich, enjoy the time there. It's just a great place to be. It's a great place to experience. from the inside as well. You know, everyone who visits Zurich is like, oh my God, it's so expensive. When you actually live in Zurich, it's like suddenly you get the Zurich wage. Suddenly you can afford it and you can experience it without the bad aftertaste, which is just awesome. And I would definitely recommend trying it out. You mean like I tried it out, I had a great time there. I decided to move out for personal reasons, but had the dice fall differently, I would have probably stayed there, right? And I know so many people who moved there, wanted to stay a year, ended up staying 5, 10 years, 20 years, like started a family there, started the business there. So yeah, I do wholeheartedly recommend checking out Zurich. And if it's too small of a place, not not big enough, not connected enough, then check out Munich as well. Or if you want to check out the innovation ecosystem, which is maybe a bit bigger, then Munich is a great place to be as well. Again, the two cities don't are not that different from an outside perspective. So definitely but like very good quality of life in both. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool, very nice. See a lot of interesting positions. Some stuff I can really resonate with, and of course, since we have a similar background, it's maybe not quite surprising. But yeah, it's great. It's always great to hear when people had a nice time in Switzerland, and of course, also I'm happy to hear that my sort of old hometown, even though I didn't grow up there originally, Munich, is still flourishing and is still advancing. I think that's great, and it's always fun to be back there every now and then and see how things are going.
All right. Thank you so much for hosting me here. It's been awesome, and yeah, happy to answer any questions if they pop up afterwards.
Definitely, yeah. Thanks for taking the time, Stefan. It was a very big pleasure for me. And maybe in a year or so, we can repeat this when your startup has maybe reached its first milestone. I'm happy to hear how everything develops, whether you will say it was a good decision to go back to Germany, or whether you're already on the way to your next country, whatever country that may be.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's definitely reconnect. And happy to have another chat at some point.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Until
much.
then, I'm curious what the comment section will say. If there's any burning questions they will have for you.
I will definitely check it out and happy to answer any questions. Yeah.